Okay, thanks everyone for your patience. So our panelists are now here. We're going to start. This is a panel on regulation that is moderated by Charlie Perreau, who leads startup coverage at Les Echos, which is a big French newspaper. So up to you, Charlie. Take it away.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. So the topic of this roundtable is, are we on the cusp of crippling regulations? So with me on this panel, I have Faustine Fleuret. You're the president of Adan, a non-profit gathering a crypto ecosystem in France. Simon Polrot, you're the head of EU Crypto Initiative, which is also a non-profit. Then we have Zaki Manian, you're co-founder of Sommelier Portugal. And finally, Xavier Lavayssiere, you're an independent researcher. So we're going to start by a big news, we're going to say that, about Russia, because I guess you saw that a few days ago, Russia just banned crypto payments. Do you think this measure will spread all over the world, or do you think this will remain just an exception? So are you worried about it or not? Simon.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So, very quick. So the payment functionality of crypto has always been something that the regulators are more afraid of compared to the other, like investing or even using it as DeFi or anything else, because the payments rails are really used by everyone in the day-to-day activities, and they are heavily surveilled, heavily under surveillance today by a lot of intermediaries. So cutting off all these intermediaries and basically allowing all the citizens to be completely off the financial system, it's probably something that is more worrisome for the regulators if they are seeing as crypto as a risk. So it really makes sense that, as an example, in Russia, you ban payments, but you don't ban investment, because investment is not seen as a threat, whereas payments without control is seen as a threat, potentially. So it could expand in other countries that really want to keep a tight control on the payment flows of their citizens, because, of course, crypto allows to circumvent that in some ways. Could allow, because today it's not really used as payment, as you know, but it could happen. But it's probably something that should remain really for the countries that really have this tendency of maybe overreaching control on their own citizens.
Faustine, do you agree?
Yeah, sure, and that's what we noticed in the EU debates to build a regulation for stablecoins. There were stricter and stricter rules on payment stablecoin with time. So now you have limits on the issuance of payment stablecoins that were introduced. You have a stricter supervision too. So yeah, it's not a ban, but the regulators and the European institutions really wanted to take care of the development of such stablecoin, payment stablecoin, and the reasons behind were monetary sovereignty and stability too.
If you want to add something, what of you?
Yes, maybe the difficulty is that you have to balance all the different components of what your money is, right? You want to. We are at the stage where most payment rails are being challenged. In a sense, you have the potential introduction of new central bank digital currencies. You have the ideas that there are many startups that are starting to offer payment services. You have all the big tech that are also entering the payment space. So we are at the stage where the regulators. It's not just about crypto in a sense. So it's not a question to be offended. It's a question about the payment rails are shifting quickly and mostly driven by the private sectors, and states have to figure out what makes sense. And some of the worries are legitimate. You mentioned the surveillance aspect and the sovereignty, but there is the dollarization. So the fact that a lot of countries, and especially developing countries, get dollar way too easy in their economy, and that weakens their own currency. So I'm not an economist enough to know what are the trade-offs here, but definitely there are different challenges.
How much of this do you think is just a backlash to Libra, right? Like, because like crypto isn't used for payments really, and it's like not really clear that it ever will be, at least like consumer payment rails. But like there did seem to be like this thing where like a big tech company was like trying to use like sort of crypto as a backdoor to like set up an alternate payment rail system that was like independent of governments. And it does seem like most of this has nothing to do with like crypto and like everything to do with like, oh, we saw that like Facebook almost like found a little backdoor through our system and like we have to close that backdoor.
I definitely agree that Libra has been the sparkling element that triggered countries, because when you say we're going to launch a global currency, I think you just chose all the right words to trigger the people that are in charge of currencies, of global affairs. And
what I told them is the only thing they could have said that was scarier is if they'd said they'd raised a standing army.
That could be a point. But I don't fully agree with what was said before about the fact that crypto is not used for payments. It's not used for payments as we are used to it in shops and so on. But what we are starting to see with DeFi and so on is like gaming, where you can have this money and so on. And the digital world is so important that slowly having the native payment to the digital world, it starts to be relevant. And probably they don't measure it even, because I think it's even stronger already than they expect.
Yes, that's a big point. Like, how do you measure the payment activities of a stablecoin or of a crypto? Because on the blockchain, a payment on investment transaction looks the same. So it's you can put into law, but then how do you enforce anything that would ban a payment transaction? It's an open question.
Simon and Faustine, you're in contact with a lot of European regulators today. Are there different levels of understanding regarding crypto? I mean, did they understand, just Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then DeFi, NFT, it's another thing?
Yes, and actually it depends also regarding member states if they had already engaged into some regulatory work before. We were talking about the harmonization of EU regulation. So yeah, even if France was a precursor, if we take each country, when they started to look at how to regulate crypto, of course they heard about Bitcoin, and sometimes that's the only crypto that they heard about. And then actually we had to educate them to other things, and that's why at the beginning, when there was a MiCA proposal by the European Commission, and that there were kind of a prohibition of DeFi, we asked if it was the purpose to prohibit DeFi, but actually it's just that they didn't know about the existence of decentralized finance. So they created rules that were completely inappropriate. And what we see now with, for example, NFTs is that, yeah, they hear about NFTs in the news. There are huge news for months now, but they assimilate all of them as an homogeneous asset class. And yeah, we have to, because there is still a poor education about crypto assets, explain and re-explain because they really want to go fast on regulation and do not really take time enough to better know about the whole crypto ecosystem.
Yes, and just to add quickly on that, the most dangerous confusion is, of course, between the CeFi and the DeFi actors. It's very difficult, also even for us, like to create legal definitions of what really is a decentralized protocol and a centralized one, right? And there's a spectrum of decentralization. So you want to avoid a regulation that allows anyone to say, okay, I'm DeFi, so I'm out of the regulation, because that would be a bit too easy. But at the same time, everything that happened around Celsius and Three Arrows Capital and everything, you hear a lot of high-end officials of different institutions saying that it's a failure of DeFi. Which shows a complete lack of a basic understanding of how the market is structured and what DeFi really means, which is completely entertained by the centralized actors that often pose as DeFi actor or CDeFi actors. So the confusion is really complete. I think this is the most significant threat that we have now, because this confusion brings also a lot of uncertainties on the future of DeFi, and we may fear that the regulator puts everything in the same basket and the same analysis for everyone.
Maybe, Xavier, do you think the regulators are objective? You have 3 hours.
So there are different dynamics between regulators, right? Like there is the objective of like making the market work well. There is the objective of protecting themselves to not be exposed to too many litigation later on. So, and of course there are different lobbying groups also that pushes in different direction, but crypto is also part of it. The thing I want to highlight is, especially when you mention like DeFi, CeFi, we are using really technical definition that everyone that has taken the time to fully understand how it works is comfortable with, because DeFi is really, it's not so much decentralization, but really the fact that you are leveraging some technologies and a certain way of doing things. And regulators are not used to think this way, because they think in terms of large categories. You mentioned like categories of assets and so on. And all of a sudden, all the distinctions have to be made through technologies. One example I have in mind also is wallets. I feel like a wallet, we have an intuitive vision of what it is. In crypto, there is a specific definition. It's something that holds your keys and allows you to interact. But then for regulators, they see that when you have an account on an exchange, what is it exactly? You own crypto, but it's not really a wallet in the end. And they have called that in the latest regulation as a hosted wallet, which has lose absolutely the meaning from the technical vision. So just to say that we have concepts that are quite fairly technical, and it's really hard, and it's not the culture of most people working on this aspect, on legal aspect and regulation, to understand those details in the end, but that are not details, that are what define everything that happened after. So that's the challenge for them.
Do you want to add something to that?
Okay. I think it mostly, like, these are the worst thing, like, you know, the part of the problem, like, okay, so like things that the crypto industry is bad at, like wallets are a terrible name for everything, and like do a really bad job of communicating like what functionality and everything, and it's very connected to like the way like Bitcoin worked, rather than like generally how like especially like more modern crypto platforms work, and I completely agree that like this like fuzziness that has been exploited between like CeFi and DeFi is like the biggest threat to the industry. Mm-hmm. And like honestly, I'm like very happy that like the Celsiuses and all have like died in this like latest cycle before they got like much bigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about MiCA. Do you think it's already outdated and we have to think about MiCA 2?
Actually, they are already thinking about MiCA too, but that's a good news because actually in MiCA they decided, and we were a lot to push for it, decided not to deal with some issues like DeFi, like NFTs, because it was too early, and of course they were also on news like Celsius, etc. So we could fear that they wanted to cover lots of things in this MiCA first. And finally, they don't. But what we know is that even if we had some political deals in June, so we have the political vision of what will be the EU regulation, we also know that, okay, they won't deal with DeFi, with NFTs right now, but the European Commission and the European regulators will start to think about this right now, to think about what could be a different paradigm for DeFi. How could we build maybe a bespoke regime for NFTs? Do we need deeper environmental obligations for Cusp or fears of crypto assets? So we have a political vision that is clear in the short term on this MiCA, but we also know that they will work a lot for this MiCA too, and that it will start really, really soon, and that the industry needs to be involved. And that's very important because sometimes the inappropriate and unadapted rules that were decided on, in MiCA because they were good news but also bad news. It's because they don't know the industry enough, and they don't speak to the crypto companies enough, and they don't assess the impact of the rules that they are decided in the debates that they have in the parliament, in their working party. That's what they call. So we do need that for this further MiCA round. We are all really involved, and we are constructive with the regulators. Meaning, we need to explain them, to accompany their work, and give them enough information to make a regulation adapted and appropriate, because there will be regulation. I mean, DeFi won't remain unregulated, NFTs too. So we really need to be there in those debates.
Simon, are you already planning for the next phase?
Yes. So there's already a few initiatives in place, actually. The Commission is preparing a report on DeFi and will probably open a consultation at the end of the year. They also want to work on NFTs specifically. There's the pressure of different international institutions to rush a bit on MiCA too, and cover everything. There's other organizations like FATF that are probably discussing around DeFi and NFTs also now. So everything, I would say that every single institution, financial institution today is thinking and talking about crypto. So yes, we are on the verge of new regulations. The question is, will those regulations be crippling? And at the EU level, we have mixed signals because it depends on the institutions. But generally, we've had a lot of constructive discussions. So we hope that the industry will be sufficiently large and mature at the time where the discussions will actually move forward, notably with regards to DeFi, so that we can have a real impact on the text and basically make it so that the DeFi regulation does not cripple DeFi, notably in Europe. But that's still an open question.
Yeah, on this, I think this thing that's the most infuriating to me is the fact that you have people that try to make good regulation, like good students, like they apply some principles and we are sure that everyone is going to be safe, but there is no strategic thinking about that. And especially, I'm probably a bit pro-European. I don't see I think only in a global objective way. It's like it's terrifying to see that nobody in the discussion, and as you say, like nobody really measures the impact of the regulation. They are just trying to make sure it's good, but, the way it's defined abstractly. But what are exactly the policy objective in the end? What we want really to avoid, and it's not really clear in the end. We want to protect consumer, but what type of consumer? What threat are really terrible? What we want to avoid? And so in the end, you have a lack of strategic thinking around the regulation. I don't think that regulation should be just making rules based on vague principles. It's a policy action. As a society, we want something to shape, and we do for that. So there should be more, probably it should be at the political level. There should be more political debate about it, trying to have a vision of what we want to achieve, and then make the regulation out of that. And at the moment, it's really like a student exercise of making something that looks neat but not really strategic.
But I'm not sure that the mandate of legislators and regulators is competitiveness or development of innovation, and that's the point actually. The goal of regulations are investor protection, the smooth functioning of markets, the fight against financial crime, etc., etc. But there is no intention to help to build the competitiveness thanks to regulation. And actually, that's maybe the very different approach that we have in Europe, and that in the US they have a completely different approach, and that maybe they go a little bit less fast than us regarding regulation, but because they have maybe a more clear ambition that they need to develop this innovation, and that's something that is missing in Europe.
And the terrible thing is, I feel like then we throw public money at innovation, and especially at the European level, we finance research. And there are crypto projects that have been funded by public funding in the end. Especially in France, we have like really good research centers that have been well funded, that have contributed to protocols. So, like for instance, CEA and so on. But then, when it comes to get the money back and get the ecosystem, there is no the full reasoning on how we really have innovation, which to me is not only a question of technology, but then having the companies and so on.
But are all the regulations that are existing now really helping the crypto industry? I mean, in France, of course, everybody knows we have the PSAN, but there are still a lot of issues. Everybody is like, oh, I have the PSAN, but they can't even open a bank account. So, is it really helping at the end?
The fact that we have a regulation in France for 3 years now, there is a mixed feeling about this because there were new rules and it was required for the structuration of the industry. There were also the intention to help on some issues that existed. You were talking about bancarization, and that's the point where the regulation was not a solution, and that it's still very difficult for French companies, for French crypto asset service provider to open a bank account in a French institution. You also have other issues that emerge actually, because we are talking a lot about regulation, but we less talk about supervision. That's the point. If we have rules, we need someone to check that rules are applied. And we have now, I think, 45 providers that are registered with the French regulator, but you have many that are not, and they should be registered. But we see nothing from the supervisor to push those other companies to register. And actually, at the end, it means that those who played the game of regulation, the fair people, they are not rewarded for that. And in France, the problem is that we have a regulation that is before others. It doesn't help, for example, to passport in Europe. It doesn't help to expand their activities. It's really, we reached the objective of fighting against financial crime, but we have this loophole because they need to go to other banking institutions. We know that French institutions are really credible regarding financial crime, but if you push Cusp to go to other institutions that are less serious about that, we don't reach our goal to fight against financial crime. And if you leave some entities that do not comply with this regulation, if they are not sanctioned, if you don't push them to regulation, we also miss this objective. So we really hope that with the EU regulation, at least for those registered Cusp, well, this harmonization will help for the passporting, for structuring the whole EU ecosystem, and that there is a better level playing field that actually doesn't exist today.
Yeah, unfortunately, the regulation cannot change the stance of banks against crypto, and there are private actors that can decide, even if they are a critical infrastructure, in the end they are still private actors, and they can decide who they want to work with, and we have not been able to find like a practical solution to actually force them or convince them, I don't know, because it's really, the situation has not really improved with banks. They are seeing crypto more and more as a threat, and not really as well, with exceptions. But there's been like changes of mind where banks were quite open, and now they are even more hostile. So that's not a good sign.
Zaki, do you have any difficulties right now? And are you ready, to play by the rules, as Faustine said?
I think it's what's frankly interesting about the EU experience versus the US experience is in the US basically there are no rules, in the sense that no one knows what the rules are. We have this defined rules through court, through settlements, right? Like enforcement red, which actually makes it sort of, to some extent in the EU approach, there are at least some semblance of rules, and you can sort of figure out what jurisdictions you want to operate in and what risks you're exposed to. Whereas in the US, it's literally no one knows the answer to this question. You can spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on legal, and you'll just be like, okay, like here's a bunch of theoretical stuff that might be useful someday, but there are no rules, right? The rules are whatever, you know, whatever the lawyers end up negotiating, or in the event that something goes to court, whatever judges decide, which is like practically more hostile to for a lot of protocols than the EU is.
Yeah, we've seen that a few days ago with the SEC lawsuit against Coinbase that named 9 assets as securities. And that's one of the first time where they do that, and it's coming out of the blue. And now we have those 9 assets. Why those 9 assets and not the 20 other ones that were also traded by the same guy that is litigated against? So there's no legal clarity really in the US. That's probably something that the EU has, that now with MiCA will have very soon, that the US doesn't have. But what we see is that in practice, it's still easier to. There's still a bigger market and a more dynamic environment to create business in the US, despite this. So maybe the regulation is not the only factor here.
I mean, the practical structure actually is for most crypto entities have to be multi-jurisdictional. Yeah. Like that's the only actual way to like put all the pieces together that you could need to operate a business. Is you need to have, like, if you look at most like crypto things, they have like a US entity, a European entity, a BVI entity, a Caymans entity. Like we've strung all these things together, and somehow we're able to like craft through like routing like different activities through different jurisdictions, like something that seems like a coherent structure.
But probably there's something I think interesting of crypto, and that might help to change other things, is natively crypto is global. By default it's global, and then the regulation artificially is something you have to cope with in a sense. And probably it's not the case to many other businesses where usually you start in a country and you start expanding your operation. Here your operations are global from day one, and then you might have to deal with some... Yep.
Xavier, do you think there are other things to regulate, other players to regulate yet? Can you be the bad guy?
No, what we see and we discuss here is the problem that all those decisions are making on the existing ecosystem. But at the same time, there is also, we have to address the problem that on crypto at the moment there is a lot of scam. There has been different waves of people losing their money in different forms, like pure scams on one side. There's been projects that have been kind of legitimate but have lost a lot of people. And also the hype about crypto, like it creates these bubbles of excitement, those TikTok videos where people build on top of like they lack knowledge, and then they become influencers. So I'm not sure who's coming who, because like you have several levels of an understanding. But the question here is, so first, when we are trying to define the line on subtle project, probably is to be harsher also on everything that's really bad. And so we have seen some CeFi actors that were doing things that are obviously absurd, and it's probably a lack of regulators to be able to identify things that are obviously, and before going about DeFi, I'm certainly pissed about all the reports about DeFi at the moment, when we have obvious scams at the moment in the crypto ecosystem that you don't need to look at DeFi, you just look at things that are obvious crimes and deal with that first, right? But the difficult part is the second layer, which is all this ecosystem of influence, the link with social media, the Discord channel, and probably there's something new that also is like there is no enough thinking about that yet, because the same problem we had with fake news over the past years, but it's like there is a full digital ecosystem of information that probably is part of this problem, and we need to have a reasoning on it, and I haven't seen yet any sort of starting of logic of how that could be a bit domesticated.
Nice, thank you. And maybe to finish, we mentioned, of course, the European regulations regarding crypto, but are there other types of regulation that can affect crypto besides what we said?
Actually, the two texts that are the most advanced right now are MiCA and the transfer of funds regulation, but that's not the end of regulation for markets in crypto assets. You have actually a package for AML, CFT, anti-money laundering and financing of terrorism. that is built on 4 texts, and they will all concern the markets in crypto assets. So TFR, there was a political deal. That's where we are the most advanced. But there will be a lot of debates in the coming months and years on if we need to a European supervision of market in crypto assets in terms of AML CFT and all the other rules that they will need to comply with. There will be other topics than AML CFT. You will have prudential requirements also that will be developed, and you have currently a consultation by the Basel Committee on what could be the prudential treatment of markets in crypto assets. We talk about the topics that will be studied for MiCA 2. So it's only the beginning, and that's why my main message is that the industry must be ready to be part of those debates and to help to build those rules so they are the most adapted and the most proportionate. And we are all only talking about Europe because in the US, in the UK, in Asia, we are at very different stages of regulation, but they will look at what we are doing in the EU, maybe to do something more attractive, more adapted. And so that's why we have to work on this, okay, but we also have to take care that we do something where we will still be competitive in the international stage, and that's why it's a problem if in the mandate of regulators we don't have competitiveness, development of innovation at the end. So we need to be in these debates, really.
Okay. And last question, do you think we're going to finish by an optimistic touch, of course? So yeah, are you optimistic for in terms of regulation? Do you think it will not stop people from innovating?
So maybe a first stab at this. What I'm optimistic anyway, I think it's been acknowledged the value of this ecosystem, and it's done. It's like until 3 years ago, it was not obvious that all of this would end up in a terrible crackdown and everyone going to jail or something. I think that now you have seen enough views, and there is now enough understanding that there is value in this ecosystem, in what's and this way of moving assets. Globally with a lot of guarantees, the ability to compose different systems, the open source, so all of this I think is kind of acquired, and so whatever happens, and then there's going to be a lot of rocky road, and we're going to have work to do for the next decade. But the underlying objective of all this ecosystem, I think, is not difficult to be. Really stop. Like there is now a shared view globally that there is an interesting thing here happening. So yeah, I'm optimistic on that.
Zaki?
All I would say is it could have been worse, as he said, and so that makes me optimistic.
Yes, I agree. Basically, with EU regulation, it's fine. It could have been worse, and I feel like we are. You're right. We are quite past the time where the regulators were still pondering, should we ban it? It's not happening in developed in Occidental countries, in the US, in Europe. It will not be banned. So this fight is won. This is already. This is already a thing, but then after that, of course, there's all these things that we are developing around crypto that are each a different fight. So it's only the beginning, but yeah, quite optimistic in the end, because quite also certain of the core values that we have and the core value proposal that we have. So,
Faustine, would you like to conclude?
On a positive that sure, MiCA could have banned DeFi, could have put NFTs as crypto assets. I think we avoided really bad ideas. So we must be happy about that, and that's because the industry was involved in that, because EUCI, Adan could be the interlocutor of those European institutions, because actually it's normal that they are not crypto experts. I mean, legislators, regulators, they are covering many topics, and we don't expect that they are crypto experts, but we expect that they hear, they listen to the voice of the industry to understand the impact of this regulation. What would be the best rules to reach those objectives that we actually all want to reach? I mean, we are all agree that we need to fight against financing of terrorism. We need the investor protection. I mean, we all agree on that. So industry and regulators do need to be involved. The industry needs to be involved with the regulators to bring the knowledge that they don't have, and regulators must listen to the industry to build a regulation that is really useful to everyone, actually.
Well, thank you for that. If you have one or two questions, it's time. We have 2 minutes or 3.
So a couple of you mentioned that one of the biggest dangers to DeFi, and in the regulation sense, is being confused with CeFi. But if DeFi at least can do, when it comes to malicious things, most things that CeFi can, are there reasons that CeFi should be restricted by more regulations than DeFi?
I don't think it's about more regulation. I mean, it's just that we can't apply the same regulation on DeFi and on CeFi. On CeFi, you have intermediaries, then you can apply rules to intermediaries. That's why MiCA was the proper regulation for that. But you can't apply the same rules to DeFi, even if you want to reach the same goals, because it will make no sense, and actually they would just be non-compliant by default if you do like this. And that's why we called for the proper regulation for DeFi in due time, because I think regulator thinks that DeFi is huge and systemic, and actually it's not. So we have time to think about the good paradigm, regulatory paradigm for DeFi that needs to be different than for CeFi.
The only other thing I would say is that protocols can do many of the same things as intermediaries can do, but the way you regulate protocols and the way you regulate intermediaries have to be completely different. And like we're not even really at the stage where like anyone and any regulator anywhere in the world has even like thought about how to regulate a protocol.
Yeah, it all stems down to the control, right? Because if you regulate a centralized entity, then you can apply to them a lot of obligations with regards to the client's funds, with regards to guarantees to make sure that you are not going away with the money. Those kind of things you can implement them with as smart contracts are obligations inside of the protocols. So it doesn't really make sense to apply per se exactly the same thing, and it's not even feasible for the protocols to apply those rules.
But is that a question of just we don't know how to apply these rules that we think should be universal to DeFi, so DeFi should be able to do whatever it wants? Or is that a question of protocols should be allowed to do this, but for some reason intermediaries should not be allowed to do this?
What I think is DeFi has very different risk profile than CeFi. You have no risk of losing the funds of the users because the funds are in the protocol, but you have really strong technology risks, so you need to audit the smart contract and so on, and the best practices in the space are probably not enough, as we see too many hacks and so on. Then you have a lot of risk, and like for instance, you have the complexity of using it, you have the asymmetry of information of users and so on. So it's totally different than CeFi, where it's really a question of a contractual relationship between an entity and a person, and then everything is about relating that relationship. That's also a bit asymmetric, but differently. And so there needs to be a well-thought process, adapted regulation for DeFi, but the base part is to say, it's a different risk profile. You don't risk to do the same thing, so you need to redefine the way you apply. So it can be the same rules, but the objectives, and we go back to well-define what are the policy objectives in the end, what we really want to make sure that society, how society work, that we need to define to be able to adapt.
I'm not sure there are CeFi risks that aren't DeFi risks. I can build you a decentralized protocol that lies to people and steals their money.
Sure, but you will do it differently than you would do for with CeFi. You will end
At a legal level?
Yes, of course. You're not operating the same way, so the risks are not the same.
One last question, maybe? No? Okay, well then we can wrap up. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.